Thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, it is a pleasure to be present at this conference representing Portugal and the Portuguese Gendarmerie Forces, GNR. The research that I will present, drones in surveillance missions, case study of the Gendarmerie Forces of the Iberian countries, is the result of my master's thesis. And if you are interested in knowing more about this topic and other works on drones, you can contact me through the email that will appear at the end of the presentation. Before starting, I will give you a brief introduction about myself. I am a second lieutenant at the Portuguese Gendarmerie Force. I started my military career in 2015 when I joined the Portuguese Army. And this year I have completed the Master of Military Sciences in the Security specialty at the Military Academy in Lisbon, Portugal. Starting now my presentation with a brief introduction. We know that society is involved in digital evolution, present and growing phenomenon in society worldwide, in which digitalization permanently transforms society. Thus, we can say that technological innovation have the capacity and powers to renew an institution or an organization, making more modern, adaptable, and competitive. Just as society evolves, crime evolves too. And the evolution of social reality is one of the factors behind the innovation and transformation of the crime, the complex crime, where crime increasingly knows no boundaries. It is in this context that the modern phenomenon arises, the crime spree, a characteristic of urban, mobile, violent, and unpredictable crime, which makes the security forces and gendarmerie forces to adopt new measures and innovate, seeking to provide new responses aimed at the well-being and safety of citizens. Well, if crime evolves, security has to evolve and be one step ahead. A modern concept of security must evolve, overcoming limited or conservative views. Therefore, the main purpose of this investigation was to analyze the use of unmanned aircraft systems, commonly known as drones, in surveillance, reconnaissance, and target tracking missions in the police activity of the Gendarmerie Forces of the Iberian countries, Portugal and Spain, and discern the extent to which the use of drones and the expansion of their use constitutes an added value for the police service and operational activity of these gendarmerie forces on these missions. And from now, I will always use the term drones instead of unmanned aircraft systems. For my investigation, a research analysis model was developed. The general objective and specific objectives are established to answer the starting question. So my general objective was to characterize the benefit of using drones in surveillance, reconnaissance, and target tracking missions in police activity of gendarmerie forces. And the first specific objective was to characterize drones and their use in surveillance, reconnaissance, and target tracking missions by gendarmerie forces. The second was identifying the legal norms that regulate the use of drones in these forces. And at last but not least, the third one was to characterize the process of acquiring drones in the gendarmerie forces. Going now on the theoretical background, well, the harmonization of the development of international civil aviation came to fruition on December 7 of 1944 with the Chicago Convention, known as Convention on International Civil Aviation, a theory aimed at the development of international civil aviation in a safe and orderly manner, in which the aircraft are capable of being controlled without a pilot, may only fly without a pilot over the territory of the state with only special authorization from that state and under the conditions stipulated in the authorization. And each contracting state undertakes to take necessary measures to ensure that the flight of pilotless aircraft over the regions open to civil aircraft is regulated so as to avoid any danger to civil aircraft. In the civil aviation panorama, we have the main regulatory entity at an international level is the International Civil Aviation Organization. At the European level, we have two entities, the EASA and the Eurocontrol. The EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency, is responsible for the regulation of civil aviation activity, and the Eurocontrol is responsible for the issue of air traffic management. At the national level of Portugal and Spain, there are entities that are responsible for the good ordering of aerial activities. And on the other hand, we have entities with responsibility in military areas of the aviation. So the Chicago Convention brought us the division of the airspace into 7 classes. The term airspace refers to a given volume of the Earth's atmosphere, which can be divided into controlled, uncontrolled, or special use airspace. And this division is dictated by the complexity or density of the air traffic flow due to the nature of the operations conducted in that airspace, the level of security required, and for reasons of public and national interest in each country. In Portugal, the air navigation classifies the airspace from A to G, and it's divided into only 4 classes, A, C, D for controlled airspace, and G for uncontrolled airspace. In Spain, the 7 classes determined by the Chicago Convention are used. In Portugal and in Spain, there are 2 different doctrines, the civilian and the military. The civilian follows the ESA guidelines, and the military follows NATO guidelines. The NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The civil drone operations are mainly divided according to the category of operations with drones, the maximum height of the operation, and the European class, that is maximum takeoff mass. In terms of civil operations with drones, these are classified according to the classes and categories of the operations, whose regulations are specific to drone flights. And regarding military operations with drones, these are always state aircraft, and are also classified by classes depending on their weight, the range, and the flight ceiling. After framing the environment of the drones, the airspace, and the entities responsible for civil and military doctrine at aviation level, it is important to classify and conceptualize the drones used by the Gendarmerie Forces of Portugal and Spain. So, the Convention of Chicago says that an aircraft is any machine that achieves lift in the atmosphere due to air reactions other than those of the air above the Earth's surface. It is also important to note that in the light of the air navigation law, the concept of aircraft is considered through 2 basic notions: its conceptual definition and the distinction between civil aircraft and state aircraft. So the concept of civil aircraft implies a negative delimitation, that is, all those that are not qualified as civil aircraft are considered state aircraft. And a military aircraft, it's a manned or an unmanned aircraft, so a drone, operated by the armed forces and must display external signs typical of military aircraft of its nationality. A state aircraft, it's an unmanned aircraft, so it's only the drones used in military customs and police service, employed in missions that pursue the state security function, primarily related to national defense and internal security. At this point, it's important to mention that, and this point is very important as it generates a lot of confusion. One thing is the concept of an operation that can be a civil or military operation. And in this operation, I can use different types of aircrafts, civilian, military ones, or state aircrafts. Now I'm going talking about materials and methods of my research. So in this investigation, a qualitative strategy was used because it was considered that there is an inseparable relationship between the real world and the subjectivity of the subject under the study. That is a relationship incapable of being translated into numbers. In this research, the inductive method is verified through the analysis of data on drones of the Portuguese and Spanish Gendarmerie Forces, appreciating their characteristics and use. As this study was a comparison between two contrasting cases, Portugal and Spain, using identical methods, the research design followed the comparative type. In this research, the independent variable was the gendarmerie forces of two Iberian countries, Portugal and Spain. In line with the research design, this investigation follows the comparative method as it focuses on the study of differences and similarities, explaining the divergences identified. About data collection, allow the elaboration of the theoretical framework based on three types of information. The theoretical, referring to models and theories based on the research problem. The empirical, which focuses on theses and works that address results of previous works. And finally, the methodological one, which concerns the approach and methods used to carry out the research in a given domain. About my sample, well, the target population has a direct influence on the conceptualization of the research results. Therefore, in this research, there was a concern with the size and quality of the sample, represented as a subset of individuals from the target population. Sampling was classified as non-probabilistic because the interviewees were chosen intentionally. It is also an intentional sample of rational selection because the investigation was purposely directed at groups of elements whose opinion was desired through interview surveys. So my sample count on 27 interviewees and 20 questionnaires. The 27 interviewees were divided into 4 groups. The group A, 14 interviewees from Portuguese Gendarmerie. The group B, 8 interviews from the Spanish Gendarmerie. The group C, 2 interviews aimed at specialists in police law and privacy and protection of personal data. And finally, the group D, with 3 interviews directed at specialists in the field of drones. In this way, it was possible to verify the saturation point in some questions as the answers and the contributions of the interviewees began to be successfully similar. With regard to the treatment of the surveys by interview, it was done using the technique of content analysis, in which an exhaustive analysis was made of all the answers given by each interview. Now I'm going to talk about the results of my research. So, about drone legislations, well, the European regulations are the same as those applied in Portugal and Spain because these two countries are in the same European community. At a national level, Spain has defined 3 doctrines: the civilian, the military, and the police for drones. In Portugal, there's still a lack of definition on this subject regarding state aircraft, but legal regulations are being created to regulate the police operations with drones. About the current status of the drones, in the Portuguese Gendarmerie Forces, they count with 34 drones, and in Spanish Gendarmerie Force, we are counting with 329 drones. And they are both used in different missions like criminal investigation, road safety, protection of nature and environment, tax and customs, special police operations, coastal and border control, and protection and rescue. Now I'm going talking about the common features of drones in surveillance, reconnaissance, and target tracking missions. In this research, I find 5 common features: the autonomy in long duration missions, the thermal camera in missions to search for missing persons or locate targets, the optical zoom on reconnaissance missions, the minimum noise on criminal investigation missions, and the image resolution on missions that the details makes difference for decision making. So in the potentialist list, it is highlighted that drones are an excellent tool for to support command and control. They allow the operation commander to make decisions in a more considerate and assertive way. It is therefore possible to define three general groups. The first one, command and control, the support for command and management decisions. Second one, security, where the risk reduction, we have a risk reduction and safety benefits, and we have the ability to see without being seen. And third one, human resource management, where we have the resource efficiency. The remaining potential presented by the interviewers includes the possibility of collecting evidences, credibility, time savings, dissuasion, and the detection of infractions. Regarding the limitations on the use of drones by police forces, half of those interviewed consider that legal limitations are the greatest difficulty in using drones. The other difficulties presented are restricted to technical specifications, air restrictions, and training. Regarding technical specifications, interviews were unanimous in presenting weather conditions, and autonomy has more complex difficulties presented are related to the impossibility of operating close to airports and the need to reserve reserve the airspace by the NOTAM, that is the notice to airmen. Now I'm almost finally my presentation. In the end of my research, I'm capable to answer the starting question. That is, what is the benefit of using drones by the Gendarmerie Forces in surveillance, reconnaissance, and target tracking missions? Well, the use of drones by the Gendarmerie Forces in surveillance, reconnaissance, and target tracking missions has the main advantages of supporting command and control, command decision to make appropriate and correct decisions, risk mitigation, in which military personnel are less exposed to dangerous situations, enabling prior recognitions of operations and approaches, resource efficiency and time savings in mobilizing patrols and personnel, enhancing military safety. Regarding the use of drones by the Spanish and Army Force, in their respective missions, the main advantage was support for decision-making, increase resource efficiency, and reduce military exposure too. At the end of this investigation, it was concluded that despite of the Portuguese and Spanish Gendarmerie forces being two similar forces, these are inserted in a different legal framework regarding drones. However, both have the same strategic vision in taking advantage and income from drones and systems anti-drone in the operational and policy scope in order to carry out their main mission to ensure democratic legality, guarantee internal security, and the rights of citizens. Well, I finished my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I'm now available for questions.